Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the program. As you would know, in South Africa today, it's a public holiday. It's Women's Day, a day to remember the approximately 20,000 women of all races and classes that marched to the Union buildings in 1956 to protest the unjust past laws and to prevent women from being included in them. Now, today, women in South Africa are faced with different challenges: gender based violence, femicide, economic marginalization, are just some of the challenges faced by women in South Africa today. But what is the value of activism for the causes of women, and why is women activism still important today? My guest on the issue is Fasiha Hassan, whom you will know is the youngest member of the Gauteng Provincial Executive Government and chair of its Portfolio Committee on Economic Development, Environment, Agriculture, and Rural Development. She joins me now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Fasiha.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me at Salam Media.
Jazakallah khair. As always, a pleasure to speak to you, Fasiha. So, first of all, happy Women's Day. I hope you had a productive day as a comrade in the movement. What were you up to today?
It's always quite a busy day for us.
Hmm.
For everyone else, it's a public holiday. For us, it's a full working day.
Right.
We've been doing a number of different women's events across the province, but today I've actually focused in a local community. My father's family is from Binoni, from Actonville, actually. So I
MashaAllah.
spent the day here and really just in a number of different community engagements, and then a couple interviews here and there, but I'm so glad to
Yeah.
have been able to spend it in a community that my family belongs to, but also to reconnect. And I think that's been one of the nicest things about today.
MashaAllah. Actonville, Binoni, lots of Muslims in this country familiar with it. Very good madrasa masjid system going on there, but it also has its own challenges. I think
Yeah.
the drug issues is quite a problem there. What have you been able to see that, and how do you think Binoni or Actonville will ever get over that? Because it seems like it's
Yeah.
quite a problem.
Yeah, that came up in today's session. We were at the recreational center, but it's also beyond that, right? The drug epidemic is linked to economic opportunity. It also has manifestations in domestic violence, which was a huge theme of today. So often in the Muslim community, people are ashamed to talk about domestic violence, especially those who are victims, but also around perpetrators. Nobody wants to name or shame perpetrators, and it's not that the Muslim community is insulated from domestic violence, it's that we don't talk about it. And I think it's so much worse because we're not acknowledging the crisis in our community. So on the issue of drugs, we always seem to have a more retrospective approach. Now that somebody's on drugs, what are we going to do? Let's get them into rehab. But I think really the process needs to be a lot more proactive. So we need to be identifying kids in schools who are at risk. We also need to give young people other things to do. Part of the problem is that there isn't enough meaningful recreational activity, whether it's through sports, whether it's through the arts, whether it's through, yes, obviously religious intent as well. But that also is one of the ways in which young people get involved in the wrong crowds. Of course, a lot of
Mm.
it is structural and systemic. People don't feel like they have a space. People are very disillusioned, depressed, etc. And that also links to mental health, which is another thing we don't deal with in our community. So today's program and event really highlighted so many different issues in our community, and for us also, it's not just about talking about it. It's how do we break that stigma? How do we break that taboo?
Mm.
Because in all of our families, let's be honest, we have a number of people who are on drugs, a number of people who are victims of abuse, and of course that comes with the perpetrators, but so many people who also suffer from mental health issues. And
Mm.
because we're not talking about it, there just isn't that support system or comfort base.
No, absolutely. But nevertheless, I mean, you got an opportunity to, meet the community, find out the issues, and of course, empathize and hopefully, suggest some solutions. Now, let's talk about Women's Day today. I mean, it's been 66 years since the march on the Union buildings by those 20,000 women headed by Helen Joseph and a few other ladies from different communities, different classes, as I said, different, professions. Let's talk about why this day is such an important day for women in South Africa.
Mm, mm. It's so important that we have commemorated the women of 1956. You know, there was Mum Helen Joseph, who was white. There was Mum Lillian Ngoyi, who was African black. Mum Sophie de Bruyn, who was colored. She was 18 at the time. Mum Rahima Musa, who was Indian and also pregnant. And it really was a wonderful culmination of non-racialism and of women who took up the mantle to fight against the apartheid system. So often we remember your Mandelas, your Walter Sisulus, your Oliver Tambas, all of which are fundamental, of course, but we don't acknowledge the women who carried the struggle. And in the deepest and darkest days of the apartheid fight against apartheid, it was women who carried our societies, who fought the system, who put food on the table, who really the back of our society that the apartheid system was attempting to break was women. So I think it's incredible that we've acknowledged it, but for me, it's moving beyond the day, right? So it's important that we've acknowledged it. But what does that mean? Because in South Africa, you know, even me as a young woman, I don't feel safe. We have huge instances of, yes, I said gender-based violence earlier, but of femicide, that's the killing of women, of sexual assault, of rape. And we can't pretend that the situation is okay or that it's normalized, right? We shouldn't have to be so panicked or worried that if you go out to a restaurant with friends, that you're afraid to go to the bathroom by yourself, or that we all have to monitor what time we come home. All of these different things that make it so difficult for us as women to function in society. And we must acknowledge that as part of our struggle, not just as women in this country, but as all of us, because the reality is it's men who are perpetrating these crimes. When people say we must protect our women, who are we protecting our women from? And that actually should be the core of where we're looking, right? We need to be educating young boys and young men to not have a sense of entitlement over women bodies, to have a level of respect, of understanding, of believing in equality between men and women. And that really is, for me, the core of what we're trying to achieve. So yes, it is Women's Month and it is Women's Day, but we can't dissociate the fact that men have a huge role to play in correcting their behavior, and in them, they must sort of measure themselves. So we shouldn't have to be protected from anybody. We should go straight to the source of who's causing the violence and deal with it there.
Fasiha, I know, you're mentioning the GBV, the pandemic in South Africa. It really is a pandemic, and the fact
Yeah.
that women in South Africa do not feel very safe anyway, leaving their home. I've got a daughter, I've got sisters, and I know it's always a worry. But for women to actually make their voices heard, do you think like social justice or activism in social justice is a clear enough outlet for women to say, hey, you know what? These are the things that we do not like, and this is how we want to be treated, and this is what needs to happen with regards to the law and bail for rapists and so on and so forth. Like what we saw after the murder of Uyinene, when women marched to Parliament and actually got the president out of his WEF meeting to say, hey, listen, we need you to make some concessions.
Yeah, I think it is a fundamental space. We need to continue fighting it as you said, through our activism, through social justice activism. But so many people don't realize that there are many sites of struggle. So in your family home, that can be a site of struggle too, where you assert yourself and where you establish a power dynamic in, let's say, your marriage, where you are an equal partner. That's also a site of struggle. Sites of struggle can be our schools, making those safe spaces, making sure that everybody knows around consent, and really creating those spaces in which women not just have opportunity to become teachers, but have women who are motivated to become, top industry heads. So for me,
Mm,
sites of struggle are important. And so many people think that we're only going to bring about change in politics. And we often forget that change starts in our society. It starts at home. It starts with our communities, because our communities or actually, let me say this, politics is a reflection of our communities, right? So if we're
mm,
only focusing on the top level, we can have excellent laws, right? And in fact, Parliament's in the process of passing 3 new pieces of legislation that are going to make it or open up the way to report sexual violence, etc. And all of that's fundamentally important. But if we're not doing similar work in our communities, in our societies, in our families, in our friendship groups, look, man, it's going to be a crisis, because
Mm,
you can't change the top and think it's going to solve the problem. You need to be working at your community level as well, and that's why I think it's as important to say that, for example, today I could have gone to the union buildings with fellow politicians, and that was a wonderful program. I think it's so important to commemorate that part of our history. But it's so much more important to be in our communities on the ground, where women and men, but particularly women, could say to us, this thing of gender-based violence is a huge crisis, and
right.
how it links to the economic element, etc. And that shows us how we can have incredible laws, an incredible constitution, but it not mean anything for a woman who's in abused marriage or in abused relationship, or is afraid
Mm,
even of her son. There was somebody who came out today who spoke about being afraid of her son, who's very violent. And I mean, it's so many
right.
layers.
Right.
But there's
Mm.
definitely work to be done in that regard.
Speaking about work to be done, Fasiha, talk to me about what society needs to do to sort of deal with toxic masculinity, dealing with those issues that can be solved within the society, bad behavior by men, as you said, men who take advantage of women's bodies,
Mm.
and even just the pure and simple discrimination based on sex.
Yeah.
Sexism. And South Africa is a non-sexist, non-racist society, and yet we do have all these manifestations. But do you think it talks to a more holistic kind of approach to this that is needed? Do you think that will be more what's the word I'm looking for? More efficient in getting
Mm.
us as a community to where we need to be?
We do need a holistic approach, but we need to be very intentional about it.
Okay.
So it starts like with those small things. When we have sons or little boys who fall and then they cry or something happens, and you sort of like, you're a boy, you shouldn't cry. That's teaching that child that showing emotion is wrong. And automatically you're starting to create a person who doesn't have a safe space to express themselves, right? Even when we raise our boys throughout school, when they do something, oh, boys will be boys, when they do something wrong, all of that
Mm,
breeds toxic masculinity, because it shows a boy that there's no sense of accountability, that he can do anything and it will be brushed off as boys will be boys. When young teenagers and young men are inappropriate with women, they are lauded, oh, wow, you did so well, you're dating so many women, or that's also part of the problem, because it's showing young boys and men that it's okay to treat women in a particular way. And so often people think that sexism is in your face, and often it is. I don't like women, but more often than not, Lukman, and this, it comes out in different ways. It comes out in at the family table. And this is an example
mm,
so common to so many Muslims. When your father dishes out first, or the best food is reserved for your brother or your son. And women now must eat last. And this used to happen in my grandmother's house until a few years ago on Eid Day, where if we had prawns or whatever it was, by the time the young women ate, because we're the lowest on the rung of this food chain, there was no proper food left. And this was also a silent struggle for me, because it was so important to say, but this can't be my family home, right? This must be something where we push for equality across the board. So I'm just
mm,
showing you different examples in our lives. So many people think that feminism and creating equality, because that's what it is, right? A lot of people don't understand feminism is just equality. If you believe that men and women are equal and should be treated equally, that's feminism. So many people
right.
don't realize that there are examples in our everyday life, of how we treat each other, that actually we do need to change. And I think one of the most important things is education. The education system that we have, yes, it's schools, but also in our society. But we also need to be empowering women to believe that they can do anything, take on anything. I mean, there were so many people that I studied with who had no intention of working, and it wasn't because they didn't want to. It was because of a confidence issue. And so many young women who are coming out just not being confident enough to take on the world. And that's something that we can
Mm,
teach our communities and teach our daughters and teach our families. So
mm,
all of that's important. And that's why I thought I should talk about it, because so many people dissociate and think, oh, we'll leave it to the government, we'll leave it to the private
mm,
sector create equal pay, and it's not about that. It's about our own homes and our own lives.
Right. And I think Banyana just showed why equal pay is so important.
Exactly. We should all pin our hopes and dreams on Banyana Banyana because they're not going to break our hearts like the male team. But it also exposes the point that we're making, right? That they
Right.
had to win and overprove themselves many times. It's
Mm.
not the first time they've outperformed the male team for us to take them seriously. And even when I tweeted about it, so many people commented, yeah, but the endorsement industry puts more money into male football because they believe that's where people are watching. But if we all watched women football, capitalism, right? They'll still invest there. But it requires
Right.
all of us to say, we're going to support this team, we're going to do whatever we can. And how wonderful would it be to one day have a Muslim woman who's playing on the Banyana Banyana side, representing our community on an international field? I mean, that for me would be incredible. And I do hope we can see that one day.
Yeah, I think the Banyana team has inspired a lot of people to start maybe either starting playing football, but we know there are quite a number of people in our community that love football and play it very well. Fasiha, the issue about amplifying these voices of the women activists that are just saying the correct things, like stop killing us, stop beating us, stop bullying us, and give us the
Mm.
same chances that you give everybody else. These are just simple, basic messages. But when somebody like yourself has to say it, I mean, everybody listens. You're in politics and you're in government, but how do we amplify those other ladies that are not as well known?
Exactly. It shouldn't be that if you have a position in society you're taken more seriously. I think that's a
Mm,
fundamental problem. And so often our communities pick up on issues well before politicians or elected public representatives do. So for me, like I said, it really is around, firstly, so many men in this process have become very defensive. Without realizing it, it's creating so much more of a difficult space to engage. So it's important to note, when we say we feel unsafe around men, it doesn't necessarily mean that all men are a problem, but it does mean that a majority of men make us feel unsafe. If we're walking in a mall and there's a man who's walking very close behind me, I don't feel safe because that person can immediately, and this has happened to people, picked up and then you're kidnapped, you're human trafficked. And the
mm,
moment we understand that there's a collective responsibility that needs to be had, the moment we then start putting more emphasis on women voices in our society. And like I said, these are things that start in our communities at home. When we have women cousins or family members or friends who speak, don't shut down their ideas. Listen to what they have to say. If a woman is saying to you, this person in our friendship group is making me uncomfortable, take that seriously, because they're not
mm,
saying that for fun. They're saying it because they're afraid, because they're worried. And so many people we know, the perpetrators of violence are people they know. So people
mm,
think that when you're raped or sexually assaulted, and it does happen sometimes by strangers, it does, but more often than not, statistically, it's somebody in your home, it's someone in your friendship circle, it's somebody you know. So just even doing a quick test of everyone in my friendship group, are you okay? Are you feeling safe? Are you comfortable speaking to this person? Watching body language, being mindful of yourself. In the same way, we as women are super mindful about our environment and who's in it. I know I do that even subconsciously, going into a space. And if I find someone I feel uncomfortable about, I keep a bit of a distance. The same way men need to
mm.
do that, right? Go into a space and, like, okay, how do I be an ally in the movement? So I'll give you an example. They did
Right.
this study in the UK about men walking in parks, especially like later in the afternoon, evening time. And it's actually been asked of those men to say, if you are walking behind a woman, please cross the road to a different side. Because if it's at night, you're walking behind a woman, she doesn't feel safe. She doesn't know what's going to happen. If a
Mm,
woman picks up her pace in front of you, allow it, slow down. Small, nuanced things like that are also things that need to be happening. And like I said, really just actively listening. So often there's two groups. Okay, there's many groups of men. There's the group of men who are becoming very defensive, not all men, etc., and I dealt with that. But there's also another group of men, we must protect our women. Listen to the group that you're trying to protect, because you shouldn't have to protect them from something. In fact, and we say this all the time, if there's a natural disaster, right, you want to
right.
deal with the crisis of a natural disaster. You don't only deal with the symptoms of it. And in the same way, you shouldn't just have to protect women, don't fall into that trap of just thinking
Absolutely.
that's going to solve the problem, because we also have
Mm,
agency as women. We also can decide how we want to fight this fight, and some people take self-defense classes, other people, like myself, enter into extremely male dominated spaces like politics to fight, and there's other people who wage it in different ways, in their own lived experiences, and it's just to emphasize that and listen, actively listen.
absolutely. And I think we're going to listen loudly and clearly. Fasiha, your message is very, very clear. Thank you so much, as always. A great pleasure to speak to you. Keep up the good work. And inshallah, looking forward to speaking to you again. And enjoy the rest of the Women's Month that you have in front of you.
Jazakallah Malana, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam.
Fasiha Hassan there, our guest on Women's Day, talking to us about what's been happening with regards to activism. Of course, she's been spending time within the Actonville Binoni community where her dad is from and making a difference there, talking to us about the important aspects regarding how women want to be treated in this country, and obviously the importance of finding a lot of inspiration from those that came before us, the Lillian Ngoyes, the Rahima Musas, and the Helen Josephs of this world. And of course, Sophie de Brain, of course, very, very inspirational people. And of course, their legacy will continue to live as every 9th of August is Women's Day in South Africa. We're going to take a break, inshallah. We move now to African politics and see what's happening as Kenya decides. Stay tuned.